Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I am back again today doing another video. The subject of today's video is going to be on Andre Drummond and specifically trade scenarios for Andre Drummond. If you're unfamiliar, his contract is up at the end of this season and Detroit has been playing really poorly, so they think that he will uh, maybe be able to provide them some value on the open market. He has said that he wants to play the rest of his career in Detroit, but that may also be just lip service. So they're fearful that he might leave at the end of the season in free agency, and so they are shopping him on the open market. So today I've come up with 5 trade scenarios for Andre Drummond that I'm going to be honest, he's not an easy player to trade based on his position and the type of basketball he plays, but I've tried to come up with some scenarios. He's an archaic NBA center. He doesn't shoot well and he rebounds a lot and he can't play outside of 3 feet on offense. And that's a hard player to sell to teams, but I did my best in these trade scenarios, but just realized that some of them I realize are kind of stretches. Without further ado, let's get into it. So I think the team that's been talked about the most in relation to Andre Drummond trades has been the Atlanta Hawks. So the first trade scenario, I have the Pistons getting Chandler Parsons and the Hawks' first round pick in exchange for Andre Drummond. Now, why would the Pistons do this? Chandler Parsons has an expiring contract, so they'd get like 25 to technically they're trading away Andre Drummond's 28 million, so they'd get 28 million back in free agency for the offseason. And then they'd also get Atlanta's first round pick for this next year, which right now Atlanta has the worst record in the East, and I think like the second worst record overall. So that would likely be a pretty high draft pick, and it would help Detroit start a rebuild. And so with that, they're kind of off on the right foot with having a lot of cap space freed up, along with a really high first round pick, and along with also maintaining their own first round pick for next year. As for Atlanta, they get a guy who can fill their starting center void. Your starting lineup after this could look something like Trae Young, Cam Reddish, DeAndre Hunter, power forward John Collins, and center Andre Drummond. And Andre Drummond is only 26 years old, so he's not too old to be playing with a really young core like Atlanta has. And that would be just a really solid starting group for them. Next trade I have here is Andre Drummond to the Raptors in exchange for Marc Gasol, the Raptors' first round pick in the upcoming draft, and their second round pick in the upcoming draft. So essentially the same trade as the last one, really, except what I'm throwing in a second round pick as well. And the reasoning for that is Toronto's first round pick wouldn't be nearly as good as Atlanta's, so I feel like Detroit would want another sweetener to this deal. So I think that second round pick would do it. I don't think that Detroit could demand a second first round pick, as in getting 2 first round picks for Drummond, because I feel like that's a hefty price for what could be a rental. But this feels like the right mix of player and draft assets. For Detroit, again, they'd be getting off of Drummond's 28 million and freeing that up in free agency because Gasol is an expiring player. And then they'd be getting another first round pick and a second round pick to help them expedite this rebuild. As for Toronto, at center, they don't have much going on. You know, they have Serge Ibaka, and he's having an okay season. Let's see here. I'm trying to think of, or I'm looking up what his stats are right now. This year he's averaging 14 points per game and 8 rebounds, but obviously Drummond is averaging 17 points per game and 16 rebounds, so that'd be a pretty good upgrade. And you could have some sort of a rotation of Lowry as the point guard, Van Fleet at shooting guard, and you could even run a lineup of then Pascal, Serge, and Drummond at times if you wanted, or you could have Stanley Johnson or Rondae Hollis-Jefferson or OG Anunoby starting with Ibaka coming off the bench. So you got a lot of possibilities, but Drummond definitely a huge upgrade over Gasol. The next trade I have is between the Mavericks and Pistons, and I have Detroit getting Tim Hardaway Jr. and Dwight Powell in exchange for Drummond. So this is the first trade that I have that's not involving draft picks. Why Detroit does this deal is that if Andre Drummond is indeed going to leave, they're getting some pretty good players back in his stead Tim Hardaway Jr. is a guy who his scoring can fluctuate a lot based on his situation. This year he's only averaging 14 points per game, but he has had a season where he's averaged 20 points per game. This is sort of a move if Detroit gets pretty desperate, I'd say, and that they're not really getting anything to build towards a brighter future, but they're getting two really solid rotation players. Dwight Powell is a guy that can, potentially be putting up like 10 points, 10 rebounds a game, and he's on a really reasonable contract. I think he's only making like 10 million a year, so that's pretty reasonable for that level of contribution. And then Tim Hardaway Jr., worst case scenario, can be your second leading scorer to a Blake Griffin. As for the Mavericks, this would sort of be like an all-in move if they really want to go for it and try and get far in the playoffs this year, which they could try and do. He would really help. Drummond would really help round out this rotation. You'd have a nice starting lineup of something like DeLon Wright, probably then Luka, Dorian Finney-Smith, then Kristaps and Andre Drummond. So a very solid starting lineup with arguably three all-star caliber players. Next, I have Detroit trading with the Pelicans. The Pelicans are getting Andre Drummond in this trade, and why would they do it? Basically, they don't have a very good starting center right now. It's a rotation of like Derek Favors, rookie Jackson Hayes, and Jahlil Okafor, and really none of those guys are starter caliber in the NBA, so I think Andre Drummond immediately is a huge upgrade at center. As for what Detroit's getting, I have them getting the Pelicans' first-round pick in the upcoming draft, along with E'Twaun Moore and Derek Favors. So why would Detroit do this? Well, both of those guys' contracts are expiring, so they would get $28 million in cap space in the offseason. And the Pelicans have really underachieved this year, and you could be looking at like a top 6 draft pick by getting the Pelicans' first round pick this year. So that's a pretty good way of expediting the rebuild and getting some quality draft capital in return for Drummond, especially if he's going to leave in free agency again. So yeah, I think again, draft assets and cap relief are what Detroit's getting back for Drummond. And then lastly, I have Detroit trading with the Kings. I have Detroit getting the Kings' first-round pick in next year's draft, along with Dwayne Dedmon, Trevor Ariza, and Harry Giles in exchange for Andre Drummond. So again, why does Detroit do this? They're not getting as much cap relief as you'd think. Dwayne Dedmon and Ariza are on longer-term deals, and both have had disappointing seasons. And Harry Giles is an injury-prone young guy who's never really lived up to his potential since college. But let me flip that around and show you the positives of this trade for Detroit. They get a first round pick from the Kings, who have underachieved this year, so that pick is going to be higher than what people thought going into the season. They get Harry Giles, who is a player who, yes, has he had some struggles staying healthy? Indeed. But does he have a lot of potential still, where if he was put into the right situation and could start and could play significant minutes, could he be a valuable asset to a team? I think so. Trevor Ariza, has he been underachieving? Not necessarily, but he's playing like a 35, 36-year-old would. And ultimately, he's basically a player where, in my mind, he's. It depends on what Detroit wants to do. If they want to contend right now, he actually could kind of help. If they just want to blow it up and go for a rebuild, he can just be like a salary cap filler, like a Chandler Parsons, and sit on the end of your bench and basically help your rebuild in that he's a salary cap pit hole and you're playing worse players because he's on the bench. Basically, same thing with Dwayne Dedmon. If you want to contend right now, Dedmon can be a guy who you can plug in and play at center. He played really well for Atlanta last year. He's been disappointing in Sacramento this year, but I think that's more a reflection of it being really weird that they signed him in the first place because they wanted Bagley to be their starting center, but yet they signed Dedmon, implying that they wanted him to start. If he goes to Detroit and they tell him, look, you're the starting center, I think he can return to his form that he was in Atlanta. But if not, they can always just sit him and he can just eat up salary cap with Ariza and they can tank. As for the Kings, Drummond, I think, is a really, really solid pickup for them. And I think, they can do some looks with Bagley at power forward and Drummond at center, and I think it would work just fine. Bagley has a good mid-range, so there would still be some spacing, and Drummond brings a good rebounding and defensive presence that this team is basically lacking right now. So overall, what are my thoughts on these trade scenarios? It's a lot of Detroit really just getting cents on the dollar for Drummond, but that's usually what you're going to get when a guy is on an expiring deal and he's flirted with the idea of leaving. So are they getting maybe the full potential for Drummond? No, but he's also a guy that could leave whatever team he goes to in free agency. So you're naturally not going to get what they're really worth back for them. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave your own ideas below for trade scenarios, and I'll see you next time. Bye.